Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and see how 5 absolutely incredible poets transformed their words into powerful tools of resistance. We're going to be looking at post-independence Indian poetry today, but, not just as a collection of beautiful verses. We are examining exactly how these writers confronted deep-seated social, cultural, and political issues, literally using their poetry to fight back against the identities that society tried to force upon them.
We have a pretty fascinating roadmap today. We'll kick things off with poetry as social critique, then look at laughter exposing social rigidity, rewriting myths of oppression, confession as powerful resistance, satirizing our postcolonial identity, and finally, wrap up with the paradox of migration.
Section 1. Poetry as social critique, setting the stage.
To truly understand these post-independence poets, we really need to recognize that they were actively challenging the power structures around them. I mean, in a newly independent nation, the dust was settling, sure, but a lot of those old hierarchies, they remained firmly in place. So defining one's own identity became a radically defiant act of resistance. Basically, every poet we examine today is fighting against an identity that society tried to box them into, whether that's based on caste, gender, colonial legacy, or even geography.
Moving on to Section 2. Laughter exposing social rigidity, the lens of Henri Bergson.
Let's apply our first lens to Pravin Gadhvi's poem, Laughing Buddha. We're going to look at this through the French philosopher Henri Bergson's theory of laughter. Bergson's core argument is super interesting. He argues that laughter isn't just about joy. It's actually a social corrective. It gets triggered when society becomes rigid, hypocritical, and blindly repetitive. Think about it. When people behave mechanically, just kind of repeating inherited customs without any living awareness or compassion, that rigidity sparks a very specific kind of laughter. Gadhvi uses this exact concept to show the Buddha laughing at human society. But to be clear, this isn't a joyful, happy laugh. Buddha, who is this figure of ultimate wisdom and compassion, is looking at a civilization that preaches morality but mechanically repeats the exact same caste prejudices, the same greed, and the same environmental destruction. Buddha's laughter exposes this massive, glaring gap between our highest ideals and our rigid daily actions. It's a sharp ethical critique, holding up a mirror to a society that entirely refuses to adapt or show true compassion. All right, Section 3. Rewriting myths of oppression, the lens of Dalit resistance.
Let's look at how poet Meena Kandasamy boldly reimagines the ancient myth of Ekalavya in her poem Ekalavan. The contrast here is just staggering. In the traditional epic, Ekalavya cutting off his thumb for his teacher is celebrated as the ultimate act of obedience and noble sacrifice. But Kandasamy completely flips this narrative on its head. From a Dalit perspective, she exposes how demanding Ekalavya's thumb wasn't a noble tradition at all. It was a violent metaphor. It represents how modern educational systems systematically crush marginalized talent just to protect inherited caste privilege. Ekalavya was better than the best, but because of his background, he was treated as a threat. That severed thumb, it symbolizes all the stolen opportunities, the lost confidence, and the forced sacrifices that marginalized students still face today.
But what happens when the resistance isn't against some massive, sprawling social system, but a fiercely personal fight for your own body and your own voice? This brings us to the real emotional turning point of our explainer. We are pivoting away from the macro society, from educational institutions and ancient myths, to the ultimate micro-battleground of the self.
Which brings us to Section 4. Confession as powerful resistance, the lens of feminist confessionalism. We're now looking at the iconic Kamala. To truly grasp her groundbreaking poem and introduction, we have to understand confessional poetry. This is a literary style that deals directly with the taboo. We're talking sexuality, deep inner conflict, and raw emotional suffering. But here's the absolute key takeaway. For Kamala Das, this wasn't just venting. By writing openly about her most intimate experiences, she was actively weaponizing her private life to challenge the very social norms that demanded her silence. Speaking the unvarnished truth about her own mind and body became a radical, highly effective form of resistance against a system completely designed to keep her quiet.
I mean, just think about the intense, rigid, patriarchal expectations placed on her. From adolescence onward, society attempted to dictate exactly how Dash should perform her gender role. They tried to tell her how to dress, what language to speak, literally criticizing her for writing in English, and exactly what her role in a marriage should be. They wanted to reduce her entirely to a socially assigned checklist, rather than recognizing her as a living, breathing, independent human being.
And her words completely, unapologetically shatter those exact expectations. She doesn't just quietly disagree, she actively reclaims her autonomy. By insisting that the language she speaks is hers alone, she is demanding utter intellectual freedom. Das openly discusses her body, her desires, and her emotional dissatisfactions without a single shred of shame. She absolutely refuses to let her identity be confined to a biological sex or a patriarchal checklist. Instead, she defines her gender and her identity as fluid, emotional, and deeply, entirely her own.
This is where the personal truly becomes political. By refusing to be silently confined to a biological or social category, Das's deeply personal confessions expose the massive invisible structures of patriarchal power. When she breaks the silence about her own life, she isn't just speaking for herself, she's speaking for countless women, transforming the confessional style from a simple literary mode into a formidable, undeniable weapon of feminist resistance. Next up, Section 5. Satirizing our postcolonial identity, the lens of irony. Now, let's shift gears away from gender constraints to the broader struggle of defining a fractured postcolonial nation. We'll use Nissim Ezekiel's The Patriot for this. There's this deep, almost palpable tension between inherited colonial influences and authentic national identity. Ezekiel used this brilliant, gentle satire and the deliberate rhythmic use of Indian English to expose a society uncomfortably trapped between these two worlds. The speaker in The Patriot is just full of this absurd optimism, bragging endlessly about democracy and progress while completely glossing over deep structural inequalities, rampant corruption, and poverty. By using a distinctively Indian form of English rather than trying to perfectly mimic standard British English, Ezekiel is making a powerful statement. He's showing us a nation still deeply confused, hiding its post-independence anxieties and colonial hangovers behind a mask of performative, unthinking patriotism.
And our final stop, Section 6, The Paradox of Migration, the lens of Cleanth Brooks.
For our final lens, we're going to look at Rachna Joshi's Leaving India through the perspective of the critic Cleanth Brooks. He argued that paradox is the absolute essential language of poetry. And the paradoxes of migration are just wild when you break them down. Pure logic would tell you that moving far away makes you less connected to your home. But poetry tells the real truth. Joshi shows us that leaving a place physically often results in this intense emotional closeness. You might gain immense material progress living abroad, sure, but you face deep emotional emptiness and dislocation. You leave the physical geographic borders, but the homeland continues to live vibrantly within your memory, your food, and your language. It ultimately results in this complex hybrid identity where you are forever negotiating between different homes and different versions of yourself.
As we wrap up this explainer on the art of poetic resistance, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative thought to ponder in your own life. We've seen how these incredible poets fought against rigid customs, caste discrimination, patriarchal silence, colonial hangovers, and the oversimplified narratives of migration. They reclaimed their voices simply by defining themselves. So I have to ask you, who is writing your story? Are you living authentically, or are you just mechanically repeating what is expected of you?